Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. I'm Glenn Bottomley, and today my guest is Ted Rodgers, Chief Marketing Officer at Digital River, a multinational technology company which empowers brands to build relationships and loyalty directly with their shoppers while simplifying the complex nature of selling internationally to accelerate time to revenue and eliminate risk. Thanks for joining us today, Ted.
Thanks, Glenn. Happy to be here.
Well, Ted, when we met before, I could clearly feel how passionate you are about wanting to constantly improve the buying experience for customers. So I'm curious, can you put a finger on where that passion comes from?
That's a great question, Glenn. Passion is always interesting. Where's the original seed from? But when I look back on things, I think about providing the experience to the end consumer is one of the most important aspects from an e-commerce perspective, and really any commerce perspective. I mean, I was out at a restaurant the other night that I go to all the time, and the reason I keep going back there is because it's a great experience. They take care of me really well. But brands spend a lot of time, a lot of dollars to build their brand, to build their product, to drive traffic to their site. And in the end, it can all be thrown down the drain with a really kind of a poor buying experience. So all of that investment is for nothing. We're all shoppers, and we know what it's like to have a great online buying experience and what it's like to have a poor experience. And I think my interest and passion comes from, in a way, being I consider myself a corporate cheapskate, not necessarily a personal cheapskate. I'm happy to spend my money, but boy, I hate wasting company money. And if you can't get brands to convert, brands they're doing just that. They're throwing their money down a drain. So, wasting the investments that they've made. So I focus it in from that perspective. I honestly really think that's a driver behind mine. Also been a little bit of a nerd or a geek my whole life. I knew this is the kind of path that I wanted to be on when I was 16. So it's not new. So that's why it's a little hard to put the finger on, but being a consumer, I know what it's like to have good experiences and bad experiences and try to help our clients and brands deliver those to their consumers.
Well, and I imagine that, like you say, your own experiences, both good and bad, help to inform how you are helping your customers. And so that helps to obviously shape strategies, tactical, experiences within the organization. So when we think even more specifically about marketing operations staffs, why do you feel that improving the buying experience for customers, why is that so important specifically for marketing teams to constantly keep on the forefront in terms of their day-to-day activities?
Great question there as well. Why is it important for the marketing team to understand the importance of the buying experiences? You got to see it through the customer's eyes. To really drive the best conversion, the best performance, you got to be thinking about it from their perspective. You also have to keep your other stakeholders in mind as well. So it's really exciting. I think about marketers, and we have our toys. And a lot of our toys come from investment dollars, right? And you've got to make sure that you can drive the best ROI to get the best out of the investment dollars, so that when you go to your CFO and you say, I want to invest more in one area or another, looking at from a data perspective, measuring the effectiveness of the changes you're making or the things that you're doing in that buying process helps to, inform the CFO of the value that you're creating for the business. So if the marketing operations team is thinking about it through what's the outcome that I'm trying to drive, how I'm going to measure that outcome and be able to build the right business case, I think that should be in the cornerstone of every marketer's approach. I mean, I'm not your typical CMO. I mean, I didn't come from just a normal marketing background. I've run fraud teams. I've run credit teams. I've done some operations and logistics. I used to be a programmer. So it's more about that overall business kind of sense to it. And I think that having that kind of lens on it is extremely important for everybody in marketing. Well, every part of an organization, but marketing, because it's such judgmental spend for an organization.
Yeah, in the breadth of experience that you bring to this role, I think is something that it allows you to build connections, build relationships, relate to others in terms of their own competing priorities at times, as well as aligned priorities. It helps you in terms of being able to speak the language and position why things are important because you can do that because you understand their day-to-day challenges. And it also feels as if, based on how you described that, is, marketing has a financial responsibility here as well, that, marketing has to make the investments that are going to drive the organization forward. But being able to do this in such a way to always maintain that awareness of the buyer's experience is so crucial. And so have you found, for example, challenges in doing that, in always, because you said something interesting. You said we have so many MarTech, platforms, that we can draw upon. We can be very easily buried in data, buried in dashboards, et cetera, on a daily basis. How do you try to encourage your teams to not necessarily get distracted by all of the information available to us, and always keeping this buyer journey and this experience for the buyer at the forefront?
Yeah. So one of the stories that I use with my team to help them understand, there's actually one that's been used with me by some past mentors of mine. It's I don't remember exactly what it's called, but basically it's flip the coin, right? If you have a coin you're going to flip, and you got 10 times to flip it. If it's on heads, it's $1. If it lands on tails, it's $2. How are you going to place your bets on those flips? Are you going to bet $1 50% of the time? Are you going to bet that it's going to be tails and get the $2 50% of the time? You should always bet on tails. It's the right bet no matter what you're doing, right? But you can't always control the outcome. What you can do is make sure you're placing your bets in the right place. That's how I try to get the team to think about, as we go into it. We can't always control how people are going to respond or how brands are going to react. What we can control is using the data to the best of our ability to try to ensure that we're placing the right bets. And that could be hardcore data like sitting in a spreadsheet. It could be anecdotal data based upon what we see our competitors doing. It's things along those lines. And I try to use that a lot, just to kind of a point of inspiration or point of clarity for the team, that we're not always going to be right, but we can try to be always right on placing the right bets.
It's a really very effective analogy that you raised there, because to your point, a marketing team, there is no crystal ball. We don't know exactly what the future is going to hold, but we have a variety of paths that we can take based on the data that we have. To your point, we can place the bets, and then, when the eventual future happens and we learn from that, then all that does is, whether we win or lose that bet, it makes the next bet more informed and more effective, and potentially closer to being more accurate, to be able to do that. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, that's right. I actually had a recent conversation with our CFO talking about some investments that we were looking to make. And his question was more like, well, I want a guaranteed results. And I'm like, have you ever been in marketing? There's no such thing as guaranteed results. But at the same time, the old 50% of my marketing is working, and I don't know which 50%.
Which 50%, right?
That doesn't work anymore, right?
Yeah.
Especially not in the digital age. We have so much more that we can track and follow through on, and in such a quicker fashion. That's what I love about what we do, is I can get a quick read on content. I can get a quick read on an ad. I can get it in days. I don't need to wait 90 days for somebody to respond to some sort of print ad that we've got out there.
Right. The time frame for placing the bet or making the decision can be so much more closer. Whereas in the past, we have to wait for this or this quarter or this whatever. But to your point, the technology today just allows us to pull up that decision to make the bet faster, sooner, which is, I think, really, really exciting. And then one of the things that I remember when we chatted before, one of the things that I thought was interesting, you said that you hold a belief that the online shopping experience can actually damage the overall buying experience. Now, on one level, that seems just very logical. But I know you had a lot of peeling back the onion, a lot of layers to this. So can you expand a little bit more on what you mean by that? a simple online experience can damage the overall buying experience.
Yeah, I certainly can. So when I think about the online experience, and um, like we were talking about earlier, getting if you get it wrong, it can really be damaging to the brand's reputation, and you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And one of the places we talk about this a lot, there's like the e-commerce maturity curve. When brands start to think like I want to sell online, where do they go? Oftentimes they go to a marketplace, and then they may want to create their own direct relationship, direct experience, and then take that as they go. They might think about going global. They're doing really well in their domestic and market. Now they want to go global. So what does that look like? They might use a marketplace again, and then go global from a direct standpoint. So all of those things come into play. But where brands run a risk when they start to think about just going online and working through like a marketplace. I think this is the example as I was using with you Glenn, before was um, you lose control, right? You lose control of the brand. You lose control of who you're sitting next to. You lose control of the data. You don't know who's buying, how often they're buying, how much they're buying. All these your brands lose that, and that's extremely important as they continue to think about. Again, go back to the investment point. Where do I place my bets? Where do I place my investments? They spend all these dollars building up their brand, but they're buying through another channel, and they don't necessarily know what's happening. They just know a sale's happening. The example on the brand reputation and where it can be, this would be an extreme example. Most people probably wouldn't fall for this one, but if you go on Amazon and if you search for a Rolex watch, and I did this again just yesterday, you got a $55,000 Rolex watch sitting next to like $100 Olavis watch that looks just like it, just like a Rolex, but it's not a Rolex. You're talking about a $55,000 difference in products sitting side by side, but being compared to one another. That's damaging to the brand. And I get that may not be Rolex putting it on Amazon themselves. It's likely a reseller, but all of those things come into play. And that's why I say if you have that piece of it wrong, that can be challenging. But then even further, if you're in that own direct experience, if you're not addressing the cultural nuance or of the consumer, there's a significantly higher likelihood of abandonment. So that means when I say cultural nuances, I'm not just talking about in the shopping experience of what imagery, what words, what language. All of those are certainly important, but all the way to the into the checkout process, it's like, what payment methods do I use? Am I actually allowing the person to transact in their currency? If it's a cross-border purchase, am I collecting taxes and duties properly? Am I doing that in the cart, or am I having the delivery agent knock on the door to deliver the product, but they get their hand held out saying you owe me $100 before you can have this $300 product for duties? All of those are very, very important experiences from an online e-commerce standpoint that in the end could drive a customer away from ever being a repeat customer. You might get them once, but you want them multiple times, and that's where brands really make their money.
Yeah, and the thing that is interesting about what you sort of that explanation of the challenges of selling internationally is, if I can take sort of what we were saying about that to the consumer or to the customer, a bad online shopping experience can damage that customer's overall buying experience. What you just also described is, if I bring that up to the level of the company who's actually selling the product, if they themselves don't have a good understanding of all of those dynamics that you mentioned, currency, language, of course, and some of those more detailed e-commerce experience level things, they themselves, they're just hurting themselves. So, right. That's just a real challenge. And so when you think about, let's just fast forward 5 years, how do you think that is going to change in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see in the next 5 years, I think you're going to see more and more brands wanting to own that direct relationship themselves rather than the marketplaces. I mean, marketplaces continue to grow. We see that. We know that. You've had things like Shein come in on the bargain end of the side, coming out of APAC to drive that end of the market. But I think you'll see more direct. I think brands are going to want to own and control that end-to-end experience. They're going to, and just like what happened, go back to the 80s basically, and you say everything used to be going to the mall, right? And you'd have the really large department stores. Let's think about those. They sold everything from end to end. But what happened inside the mall is that it could be the same product line. Like Levi's might be being sold at, let's use an old 80s name, like a Carson Peary Scott, right? A department store that doesn't exist anymore. But Levi's opened a store in the mall to sell it and represent its brand in the way that it wants to represent itself. So I think you'll see the same kind of things happening from an e-commerce standpoint. Amazon took off like mad. Alibaba is taking off like mad, right? And it's out of sheer convenience. I'm in one destination to shop. But if a brand really wants to build and develop that rapport and longstanding relationship with the consumer itself, they're gonna need to build that direct. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think Amazon's recognized that as well. They're taking their capabilities, such as Fulfilled by Amazon, and they're calling it multi-channel fulfillment, where they're going to take their whole infrastructure for that fulfillment and logistics side and allow brands for their own direct to consumer relationship to leverage that same inventory and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm,
so they recognize
mm-hmm.
it's coming as well. That's how I see it.
Well, in Ted, just a moment ago, you talked a little bit about the malls. So, and obviously there is such a push for e-commerce, and the way in which, we experience e-commerce in the United States is, a little bit different from, as you say, in terms of APAC or, name the location. There's always those unique differences. But you mentioned the mall. So do you think in-person shopping is going to have a resurgence?
Yeah, in-person shopping, I think, is already seeing a resurgence, right? We were in midst of the pandemic, and everybody's talking about, oh, this is now going to be the new normal. And well, I don't think we know what normal is. It also was unprecedented times. I've used this phrase more than I probably should, but I have yet to see a precedented time in e-commerce. Everything's unprecedented. We've never been here before. But yeah, I think people are returning back to in-person shopping. And I think the reasons behind that is shopping is an entertainment factor. It's fun for people. They're getting out of the house. They're doing things, right? So I think there's that fun factor. I mean, I have friends of mine, I'm pointing like he's sitting right behind me, but he lives right behind me, that says, I don't know why anybody ever goes to a store anymore. I just buy everything online. But not everybody is the same way. He wants to spend most of his time on the golf course, not in the mall. But there's the fun factor. And I think that's what brands have to figure out to continue to see the ongoing growth in e-commerce is how do you bring that fun factor into it? How do you bring the joy that people get from touching and feeling and experiencing shopping? It's just not the same online. But I think we're going to continue to see evolution that's going to support that. We've seen it already with some of the clothing companies. They have the virtual try it on. You get your head and they can see what it looks like on you. They have that for redoing a room, looking at furniture, take a picture of your room, and you can see that. I think that kind of engagement activity is going to continue to grow to bring that fun factor into e-commerce. I think it has to, because otherwise it's been more from a convenience, a bargain hunting play. That's where the showrooming effect came into play, right? People would go into Best Buy to look at the product, but then they buy it from the cheapest place they could find online. And you'll still see some of that happening as well.
Sure. Yeah. For me, I'm one of those individuals that, I enjoy going to a mall. I enjoy walking through. I enjoy browsing. I don't often buy anything when I'm walking in a mall. But to me, it's almost an imagination. It's a wandering. It's imagining what it would be like to have, some item or what have you. But then when it gets down to that point, it's like I still often will just come back to that e-commerce experience. And you talked a bit about, sort of how when a brand can go direct, that this is an opportunity for them to both not only control and manage and or potentially rebuild a relationship with their buyer. But what data and insights do you think are available that can help a company learn from all of the other types of shopping experiences that they can have, and how they can incorporate that into their own business?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different places, and I was thinking about this question, and how do we use it? Certainly, there's always the competitor shopping, right? What is the experience that they provide? We do that. We've done that with our brands and their competitors. We worked with them. There's certain agencies out there that can help, but then there's tools out there that can help a brand understand where their opportunities lie, right? I mean, I look at and we leverage tools like SimilarWeb to look at web traffic and where is it coming from. For any specific brand, if they're thinking about their web traffic, let's say they're just a U.S. company, primarily selling in the U.S. today, but they may have web traffic that's coming from outside sources from other countries, and that's a great indicator of untapped potential. You may not be marketing in France, but somehow you're seeing demand from France. Your product is somehow gained interest. Well, that in itself is a great mechanism for people to understand where their opportunities are. In that, as well as we're thinking about the tool sets that brands should use to build their e-commerce experience, needs to come into play. And tools like Built With to understand what are other brands, their competitors using to see what does the tech stack look like. They certainly can leverage tools like that as well. But again, I just think it does come down to that benchmarking against your competitors and benchmarking against what else is being used in the market. And I was actually listening back to one of your other podcasts in the past, back in July 5th. It was like maximizing your marketing impact, and it talked directly about what I was talking about, using your own web analytics to understand where traffic's coming from, paid versus direct, organic, by geo. And leveraging those to truly help understand how they can quickly test and learn what's working, what's not working. I thought that was a good one. People listen to this, they should go back and listen to that one as well, because I think it ties in very well.
Thank you for that. And I want to go back to that one example also that you shared a moment ago about the Rolex on a shopping marketplace, and a $55,000 Rolex sitting right next to a very, very similar looking watch that's much cheaper, $500 or $50 or what have you. Now, so that's a really perfect example of some of the challenges that a brand can have about what happens when they're selling their product through a marketplace, and how it could damage any sort of perception of luxury, some sort of luxury item in the marketplace. But I'd like to flip this around a little bit. So in other words, now imagine a brand makes the decision, I'm not going to sell through a marketplace. I'm going to go direct. So can you then share, for that brand that's listening, that is thinking they want to do that, what are some of the advantages for that brand to help that once you go direct, here are some additional benefits for you that can improve the overall perception of luxury? If you're having a luxury item, let's say that your product is a luxury item, potentially a watch, but are there other ways of looking at that on a positive?
For when if they go to take this direct, I mean, the real advantage that they have is they can own the end-to-end experience, right? Everything from like the placement, like we were talking about, what it looks like on the marketplace,
post-purchase marketing.
And that's where I'm just going to go. Yep. On the post-purchase side. So now even the box is delivered in. I like to I wish I could poll the audience here. How many people still have the box for their Apple watch or their iPhone, because it's just part of the experience, right? Part of the whole thing. I mean, it's so cool, and you're opening it up and you're unfolding all this cool stuff, and it's laid out in such a way. And when you rely upon somebody else to handle everything that you do, or that represents the brand, the buying experience, they just don't have control over that. And I think that's one of the bigger advantages. So yes, it's certainly what do I look like on the shelf? And that's what we're talking about, the example of Olavis versus Rolex. I mean, they're sitting on the same shelf side by side. They're not anywhere in the same category. It's not going to be the same buyer, but it tarnishes the image. Then you go to the checkout process, and does it, like we were talking about, do you have the payment methods that I want? Are you going to collect duties? Are you going to represent that the right way? If you do that yourself, you have control over what the pricing looks like. Do you want to include duties in your price? Do you want to exclude it so they can see what that looks like? That's a brand
Warranty.
decision.
Yeah, warranty, cross-sell, upsell, just having that connection to your buyer, it just
Yeah.
allows for a more longer term lifetime value, reconnecting to them, referrals. I mean, I can feel how you could just, talk for an hour about the benefits to a brand for going direct.
Yeah, and that's what we, obviously that's what Digital River specializes in. We handle that global back office so brands can worry about what they do best, which is building products and marketing their products, and not having to worry about, how do I collect tax in Turkey? Is that a competitive advantage for me? Probably not. They can worry about the things that matter the most, and we can help them with the rest of that. Um, yeah. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And speed to move is hard. Brands get really worried and concerned about the complexity of going global, and that each country has its own requirements for compliance, for taxes. I keep bringing those things up because those are the points that people get worried about, and it takes them a long time to figure it out themselves. Plus, the capital infrastructure they got to build to figure it out how to do it themselves, not just the systems but also the people.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Well,
All those they're costly, and it takes time to develop.
And if, to your point, if you can negate that risk or minimize that risk or even eliminate that risk, then it just makes it much easier for them to make a decision. And you mentioned Apple, because I am one of those individuals that I do still have. I know I have one Apple box somewhere. I know it's still in my home. So when you think about the packaging, packaging obviously is a form of physical marketing. But if you think of physical marketing, there's, whether it is, a trade show booth or marketing materials or printed marketing materials or product packaging, et cetera. Product packaging and physical marketing has to work together with digital marketing. It's obviously crucial for success. So can you just share a little bit about how you see that firsthand and how it is impacted with everything we've sort of discussed so far in this episode?
Yeah. So the way, to your point, I'm glad you said it the way you did about physical marketing, because obviously if it's a physical good, the packaging is part of that. For us, we don't really have a physical good. We're a technology service, right, in the back end. So I'll put it in kind of our context first. When I think about it for us, it's a lot more of the hand-to-hand combat. It's the tools in the air cover that we put in support into the hands of our sales team. But we need our brand marketing, our digital marketing, our social media, all of that to create air cover for our reps who still have a one-to-one kind of sale, right? It's not like people are just coming to the site and just signing up, and you can do that for part of the product capabilities. But when I think about the physical marketing, you mentioned events. That is certainly one of them. The sales and event materials, the one-sheeters, the pitch decks, all of those come into play for us. And having a strong linkage between the two, whether it be the physical asset that I have at a trade show that is going to bring somebody to our site, the storyline has to be crisp and clear and consistent across those, not building something off that's just a one-off piece that doesn't translate well into the story that you're telling in another component. That's how we think about it. That's how we're focused on it, is just that continuous storytelling through the life cycle of any sale process. And in our case, it happens to be a B2B sale, so usually longer than what you'd have in a consumer
B2C
sale.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Excellent examples. Ted, before we wrap up today's episode, what is the main takeaway that you want to share to help understand the challenges facing marketing operations executives today?
Yeah. I think I probably have 3 takeaways, if that's okay. I'm going to cheat. With the rapid changes in our market, I think the biggest challenges are kind of what we've talked about. The first one is knowing where to place your bets from an investment standpoint. And, don't be afraid to make the bet, but make sure you can track the outcome. So being able to, second one was to effectively and efficiently tracking the performance and that outcome. And then the third that I think one of the biggest challenges that we all face is the increased noise in the market, right? There's more advertise out there. So whether that's you're competing for indirect traffic or direct response, whether it be you're competing against your competitors or just other noise in the market, all of those are challenges for us. So in the end, again, it's you take all of that into play. It comes down to what's the place to play or best place to put your bet to ensure the best experience, regardless of country or wherever the consumer's at, to maximize that conversion. I think you spend so much time and energy on the front end. A small percentage change on the back end for conversion rate can have a huge impact on your ROI.
Really valuable perspectives, Ted. Thank you. Well, that wraps up this episode of The Art of Marketing Operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ted.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Well, until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Marketing Operations, brought to you by Taylor. Don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share. Until next time.